It's now almost 20 years since I first presented a Christmas programme on TV. It was an incredible experience and it had the most amazing response. Now, all these years later, here I am again. Every year there are new generations of people cooking Christmas for the first time. And I think a real classic, homemade British Christmas is part of our history and heritage. Well, first of all, a warm welcome to my home, where, during the next hour, I'm going to try and convince those of you who feel a bit unsure about it to cook a very homemade, very traditional Christmas. Just close the door, switch on the radio. The best-kept secret is that home cooking doesn't just taste infinitely better, it's also much cheaper. But first, let's just hear the sounds of Christmas. It's the crunch as you bite into pastry. It's the sound of something sizzling in the oven. And the crackle of crackling. Coming up, there's rich dark chocolate and thick velvety cream. We don't have it every day, but when it's Christmas, we do have double cream. I'm hoping you're going to try some new Christmas recipes. I've got a pan here that is really hot. I always say hot as you dare. We've got some very clever canapes. I'm going to show you something that I've only just discovered this year and I'm quite excited about it. I think we've got the best trifles ever. I know chefs wouldn't approve of this, but I don't mind about chefs because we're home cooks. And of course, Christmas wouldn't be Christmas without turkey and all the trimmings. I have to say I've never, ever had a dry turkey. But before you even begin to think about cooking anything, first of all, you've got to make a plan. What you need to do to get ahead is work out what you're going to need to get you through the whole Christmas holiday. And although you've got to go out and do sort of basic shopping if you're cooking, it's nice to get that over with and not be there in the crush at the last minute. Then have the mother of all clear-outs and restock your store cupboard with all the ingredients you're going to need. Once you've done a big shop for fruits and spices for your puddings, cakes and mincemeat, ordered your turkey, ham or beef, and make sure you do it early, don't forget to line up all the booze. It's time to begin. Well, the very first thing I've got to do is persuade you to make a Christmas pudding. Christmas pudding is the beginning and the end of Christmas. It's the first thing you make. And I've got a feeling that some people think they don't like Christmas pudding because they've only ever had the bought stuff. So here I am, almost on my knees, begging you to make it and taste the real thing. And I'm able to tell you right now how very, very easy it is. It helps if you tick off your ingredients one by one, because there are lots of them, and believe me, it's easy to miss something out. After all, it's full of good things: sultanas, raisins and currants, chopped almonds, candied citrus peel, soft brown sugar, white breadcrumbs and shredded suet. When it's all in the bowl, I'm adding the grated zest of half a lemon and an orange, then a cooking apple, chopped with its skin on. Then we've got spices, and the spices we've got a mixed spice, freshly grated nutmeg, and I've got cinnamon. Next we're going to combine dark stout, old-fashioned barley wine, 2 tablespoons of dark rum, 2 eggs, and then give it all a whisk. And then the key thing is to stir, and to stir, and to stir, and to go on stirring. It's beginning to have a very, very Christmassy aroma. Just keep stirring, and then what you need to do is just lift up some on a spoon and let it just plop off like that. If it doesn't, if it seems a little tiny bit dry, you can add a spot more stout, but that's pretty good. What we're going to do now then is leave that to develop. What I mean by that is all the flavours and all the alcohols to kind of mingle and develop together before we cook it. So what we're going to do is just put a cloth over the top and just leave it like that overnight. So after a whole night of festive soaking, we remove the cloth, and you can see that all those fruits have now absorbed the alcohol and they've just become really plump and juicy. So now we're going to add some flour. Give it another good stir, and then it's ready to go into the pudding basin. Then just smooth it out, cover in parchment and foil, and tie it with string. And then that's all ready for the steaming. What we're going to do is steam the pudding for 8 hours. Now, I know that sounds a long time, but slow cooking is what brings out all that wonderful Christmassy flavours. The water must be boiling, and all you've got to do then is keep an eye on it, obviously, and then just top it up if the water looks as if it's going down a bit. So it's steamed away all on its own for 8 hours, and then I took it out of the steamer and I've now let it get quite cold. Now I need to put fresh coverings on. You need to store it in a cool, dark place, and that could be either in a cupboard or even under the bed in a cool, unheated room. Christmas pudding actually keeps for years, so why not make 2 and have one next year? What does Christmas actually mean to me? Well, obviously, I believe in what we're celebrating. That's a start. But I think what we're celebrating is the beauty of human life and how wonderful it is when people come together and celebrate together. Traditionally, this celebration is always going to need a dark, rich Christmas cake. It's called Creole cake, and it comes from Barbados, from a sugar plantation, and I have to say it is one of the most popular Christmas cakes ever. Now here I've got a selection of fruits. Still got currants, raisins, but this time chopped prunes, and again chopped candied peel from whole candied peel if possible, mixed chopped nuts, and this time glacé cherries. And now to those I'm going to add a tablespoonful of molasses sugar, ground cloves, freshly grated nutmeg, cinnamon, and half a teaspoon of salt. And now the special bit is it's going to have quite a lot of booze, and you'll see as we wheel it on. 3 tablespoons of port, then we're going to have 3 of brandy. Although this might seem quite extravagant, if you make this every year, you'll find these bottles will last you for years. 3 tablespoons of rum. After that, quite a special one, I think, really adds something, is cherry brandy. A little bit of water. This is Angostura bitters, which people use in cocktails and things, and we're going to use 1½ teaspoons of this. Finally, some pure vanilla extract, and again 1½ teaspoons. Now with a wooden spoon, Give it all a good stir, and then I'm going to turn the heat on and just bring it up to simmering point. Let it simmer gently for 15 minutes, then cool and store in a sealed container in the fridge for about a week, giving it a shake from time to time to allow the flavours to mingle and develop. So here in my jar I've got Creole cake fruits, and they've now been soaking for 7 days. When you take the lid off, wow, Christmas. Now we're going to see to the cake itself, and in my bowl here I've got butter, eggs, demerara sugar, self-raising flour, and the great thing about this is you're just going to whip it all up together. Once it's well mixed, add the fruit. And then take a large spoon and just fold the fruits into the cake mix. Push it to the side, go down, twist it over. And now we're just going to spoon the mixture into the tin. Bake at 140 degrees centre shelf for 3 hours. Then cover the top with parchment for a further hour until it's ready to test. Now what I want to show you now is how to tell when your cake is cooked. You just put a light finger touch in the centre, and then if it just springs back, as this is springing back now, then you know the cake is cooked. If it doesn't spring back, then what you need to do is whack it back in the oven for another 10 minutes or so. The cake will improve with keeping, and did you know that it's traditional to feed a Christmas cake? Just take a toothpick, make holes, and then spoon brandy into them. Wrap it up again, then in a couple of weeks' time, you can feed the other side. To decorate, brush the cake with an apricot glaze. Then, on goes the marzipan, and on top of that, a square of fondant icing. I like mine to be really thin. Decorate with a classic shooting star and silver balls, using sticky egg white for glue. If icing isn't your thing, then brush it with an apricot glaze, pop some toasted nuts on top, and finish off with another coating of the glaze. I think sometimes, the pace of modern life is such that we don't have little spaces, we don't have times for reflection. And one of the nice things about preparing for Christmas and cooking at Christmas, if you get these little spaces where you can sort of sit down, put the radio on, snip your candied peel, do the little bits and pieces that you need, and in a way there's something, although it's work, there's something quite relaxing about it. One of the things that's very important at Christmas is to get ahead. So if you're the one who's doing all the cooking, it's enormously helpful if you have one of these. And this is it, a rather large freezer, not enough room for it in the house, but at Christmas it really does come into its own. Now, what I've got in here is a very nice iced chocolate chestnut torte, because that freezes really well. I've got mince pies, sausage rolls, breadcrumbs. Anytime you've got some bread left over, make some breadcrumbs, stash them away for Christmas. The other thing it's always handy to have in the freezer is frozen seafood, because it cooks very quickly and always just very handy to grab anytime you need an extra meal. Frozen seafood is always a good standby throughout the holiday, but for this next dish, I want to use fresh scallops, which are a big treat for me at Christmas. What I'm going to do first of all is take off the orange coral bit, and slice this into 2. Now, if it's very thick, you might want to slice it into 3, but that's the kind of size you need for the dish. Add the white part of the scallops to some simmering dry vermouth and poach for 30 seconds. Then pop the corals into the pan and poach them for a minute. Here we've got in the saucepan melted butter, and either you can use a small onion, very finely chopped, or a couple of shallots. Just soften the onion, and then I'm going to add some mushrooms. Season and simmer gently for 15 minutes. You then add some flour, and you just stir the butter into the flour. When it becomes a smooth paste, add the poaching liquor a little at a time to make a sauce. Now I'm going to turn the heat off and add a little bit more butter. Then I'm going to add double cream, and we don't have it every day, we don't even have it every week, but when it's Christmas, we do have double cream in our sauce. Now that's going to be left aside to get quite cold. Add the poached scallops to the sauce and just fold them all in. And then they're going to be spooned into gratin dishes, like that. And in here I've got a mixture of fresh breadcrumbs and Parmesan cheese, and I'm going to sprinkle that on the top because that's going to give it a lovely bit of crisp when it comes out of the oven. Then pop them in the oven at 200 degrees for half an hour. Serve 1 for a first course and 2 per person for a main course. Either way, this is pretty special. If you want to freeze them, after you've sprinkled on the breadcrumbs and parmesan, make sure they're absolutely cold, and then you can freeze them till you need them later. And then what's underneath the scallops there is a little box that's full of braised red cabbage, because that's one of the cooked vegetables that really does freeze well, and it's so handy to just have that all tucked away in case you need it. You can serve it with pork, venison, sausages, and my blackened gammon, which I'm going to be showing you how to make in a minute. I think there's only one way to cook red cabbage, and this is it. I always make twice as much so I can freeze some. You begin with shredded cabbage in a large pot. Add chopped onions, garlic, and chopped apples. Dark brown sugar, nutmeg, ground cinnamon, ground cloves, and some vinegar. Give it a good stir. Then before it goes into the oven, add some butter and seasoning. Then another good stir, and cook it slowly for 2 to 2.5 hours. Now I want to show you what I always cook on Christmas Eve. It's not only a great recipe served hot, but there's lots left to serve all over the holiday with homemade pickles and chutneys. This lovely thing here is a collar of British bacon, and it's been smoked, and it's what I always have at Christmas. I feel almost reverential about it. It's so good. Now, you might not like the fact that it's got a little bit more fat in it than middle cut gammon, but I think this is the cut that has the most flavour. The other thing I need is to have it scored, which they do for me, and even though I buy it scored, I still go over it with my knife, because what we're going to do with this is we're going to cook it so that we get crackling, and the way to get crackling is to have all these scores. All I'm going to do with that is place it in a roasting tin. Now, the name of the recipe is bacon with blackened crackling, and the black bit is this, which is molasses. So what we do first of all is just paint it over the skin, and it's the lovely dark sugary flavour of molasses that's going to flavour the crackling. Then just a little sprinkling of salt, put it into a hot oven and roast it. Now all that's going to need is a lovely sauce to go with it. I'm just going to show you now one of the greatest classic English sauces ever invented. And the good news is it's very, very easy to make. It's called Cumberland sauce. Thinly pare off the zest of an orange and a lemon, cut into very small, thin strips, then boil in water for 5 minutes to extract any bitterness. Then melt 4 heaped tablespoons of really good quality red currant jelly with 4 tablespoons of port. When it comes up to a simmering point, just turn the heat down, whisk very gently until all the red currant jelly has melted. This is very special. It's my great-grandmother's bowl, and I always bring it out at Christmas, and I always put Cumberland sauce in it. What I'm going to put in here is the juice of the orange and the juice of half the lemon. Here I've got English mustard powder and ginger powder. And what happens with this is the mustard powder just gives a very slight sort of thickening to the sauce when it's ready. Once the red currant jelly and port have melted, add to the mix. Then we'll give it a little whisk, one more whisk, and then add the citrus peels. The beauty about that wonderful Christmassy sauce is that you can serve it with pâté, you can serve it with cold cuts. It keeps in the refrigerator if you put it into a screw-top jar or a polythene box, or just cover the dish with cling film, and you can keep going on and having a little bit more, It'll go right through to New Year. That sauce served with the collar of bacon is a sublime combination. Don't panic and think it's burnt, because the molasses make it look really black like this. So remove a little bit of crackling first, and then just cut it into slices. Now, the Cumberland sauce that goes with the gammon is always served cold with the hot gammon, which is a nice contrast. And then the final garnish is going to be this, which is the blackened crackling. Coming up, turkey and all the trimmings, but also some great alternatives, including something special for vegetarians on Christmas Day. We've also got ideas for snacks with drinks and party stuff. Well, this is a bit I've really been looking forward to, because now we're going to talk turkey. And I have to confess to you, I really do love turkey, and I think some people don't get turkey, and I want to show you how to get it today. Now, when you're buying a turkey, if you can see a little band of fat down here, it means you've got a good one, because fat is very important to the cooking to keep it moist. And also, if it's a real proper one and not a mass-produced one, you might have a little bit of designer stubble, but that's nothing to worry about. You can take it out with the eyebrow tweezers if you want to, but I don't bother. So that turkey now is going to next have some stuffing in it, and I'm going to use classic sage and onion stuffing. Here's how to make it. Process chunks of bread into a rough texture. Add sage, then onions, and combine with good quality pork sausage meat. Next, add 2 tablespoons of water and seasoning. Then combine with a fork but finish off by hand. Now it's time to stuff the turkey. It's quite easy to do it. At the end here you'll see a neck flap. Lift it up, and what I'm going to do is put my hand in and just ease the skin away from the flesh. Then you just take handfuls of the stuffing, easy as pie, just pack it in, there we go. Now the reason for the stuffing and the reason why it goes inside the bird is that pork is a fatty meat, and what that does is while the turkey's cooking, the stuffing melts and internally bastes it and keeps it lovely and moist and succulent. And then just get some toothpicks to just seal that flap down. Just push them in so that you're just tucking that down and sealing it. What I'm going to do with the rest of the stuffing, I'm going to put that in the body cavity. Now we're going to put some butter on it. Smear the butter all over. I have to say I've never in my life ever had a dry turkey. Right, next we're going to put a little bit of seasoning on. And then I'm going to put slices of streaky bacon to protect the breast while it's cooking. So we're never going to have a dry breast, it's always going to be juicy. And now that's ready for cooking. Underneath here I've got a baking tray, and then the baking tray has two pieces of foil, one going that way and one going this way. But the reason I've got so much foil here is because I don't want to completely enclose it. You bring it up to the top, then you just make a little pleat. And what we're doing here is we're making another little oven. So it sits in an oven inside another oven, and this protects it. Now that's all ready to go into the oven. For an average 6.5 kilogram turkey, preheat the oven to 220 degrees. Then give it a good blast of heat for 40 minutes, then turn it down to 170 degrees and let it cook slowly. This is bread sauce. If you've never tried it, I promise you it's another great English classic. First, finely process breadcrumbs. Then add a large onion cut in half and studded with cloves. Put it in a saucepan with milk. Pop in a bay leaf, some peppercorns and a sprinkling of salt. Bring to the boil, take off the heat and leave it in a warm place to let the onion juices infuse for a couple of hours. Then remove the onion and seasonings. Add the breadcrumbs until they swell and thicken the sauce. Next, add half the butter. Put the onion back and leave in a warm place until you need it. Just before serving, remove the onion, squeezing all the juice out as much as you can get between two plates. Reheat gently, then add thick Channel Island cream. Pour into a jug and add the rest of the butter. Time to check the turkey. Half an hour before it's ready, take it out of the oven, Remove the bacon and trim back the foil. Then you can start basting. Best thing to use is a long-handled kitchen spoon like this. Lift up the corner of the tin just to tip it slightly and you'll see all the lovely juices. This is what old-fashioned cooks always did. Lots and lots of basting, because then the juices just add to the flavour. And also the bacon that's on the plate here, what I do with that is I put it on the floor of the oven and it just finishes cooking and getting nice and crisp, but keep an eye on it. So back we go to the oven. For the last half hour of the cooking time, hike up the oven temperature to 200 degrees and allow the turkey to brown. Keep on basting and you'll actually see the juices bubbling up underneath the skin. Now I have to show you what is without doubt the best cranberry sauce ever, and I still can't believe the simplicity of it. It's called cranberry relish, and you begin by pulsing the cranberries in a processor, or you could chop them by hand. Pop them into a saucepan with caster sugar, the juice and rind of an orange, freshly grated root ginger, a piece of cinnamon, 4 cloves, and simmer it for just 5 minutes. Then remove from the heat, add 2 to 3 tablespoons of port, and remember to take the cloves and cinnamon out. If there's any left over, it's great served with cold cuts, and it'll keep in the fridge for up to 2 weeks. Right, this is called Catch the Moment, and now we're going to see, is it cooked or isn't it cooked? All you have to use is this very important piece of kitchen equipment, which is a skewer. Couldn't cook without a skewer, I couldn't. And what we're going to do now is go into the middle of the thickest part of the leg with the skewer, like that, and then you can see all the juice rushing out. Now what we want to see now are the juices clear, and that means the turkey is done. If the juices are slightly pink, it isn't, and you just need to whack it back for another 10 minutes and then have another look. What's going to happen now is the turkey will be transferred to a board because it's done, and while it rests, all those juices kind of seep back into the flesh, which is what makes it nice and juicy when you eat it. Now all we want is a turkey gravy with masses of flavour. First, drain off any excess fat and juices into a jug. Take 2 to 3 tablespoons of fat and add to a saucepan with some flour. Then blend that into the fat. Next, ladle stock made from the reserved turkey giblets into the pan, stirring all the time until it bubbles and thickens. Then add a dash of gravy browning if you want a richer colour, a little more stock if it needs it, and simmer gently until you're ready to serve it. We've lived here now for 40 years and love being in the country, close to the changing seasons. I always think winter has its own special beauty, and as we approach the very darkest days of all, we have this great feast to look forward to. Well, although it's very nice to stick with tradition, and I always do, Christmas does last for 8 days. There are other days, and if you don't want to have a turkey on Christmas Day, well, there are other lovely things too. This one's a perennial favourite if you want to serve an alternative or something to serve on other days. This is a really great recipe. It was an old classic French recipe called beurre en croûte, which translated means fillet of beef wrapped in pastry with a wild mushroom stuffing. In the saucepan here, I've got butter, and that's been melted. And then in my bowl, I've got finely chopped onion and finely chopped dark gilled mushrooms. And that's going to go in with the butter. And then the other ingredient is dried porcini mushrooms.
I'm going to soak these in hot water for about 20 minutes and then keep the soaking liquid for later.
They're going to go in and join the rest and just give all that a good stir together. So what I'm going to do now is turn the heat down and let it simmer gently for about 35 minutes. But first of all, I'm going to add this, which is freshly grated nutmeg. And I've been saying this for 40 years, but I'm going to say it once more. And that is, don't use nutmeg ready grated. It loses all its kick. Then we're going to have some salt and pepper. What will happen now, especially when I add a bit of salt, is the mushrooms and the onions, while they're cooking, are going to release all their juices. And when the juices have all reduced and evaporated and gone away, you have this really wonderful, concentrated wild mushroom flavour, which is brilliant.
But remember to keep 1 tablespoon of the mushroom mix for the sauce later. Here we've got a rather splendid piece of beef, a whole piece of fillet.
Before it gets wrapped in the pastry, it needs to have a lovely brown, crusty edge. So what I'm going to do is season it with some salt and pepper. And I've got a pan here that is really, really hot. I always say hot as you dare. So in we go with the fillet. So that's going to cool down now, but whilst it's cooling, it's going to have a bit of a brush with something special, which is brandy. And what I forgot to tell you is when you're browning the beef, if you use beef dripping, you get a nice extra bit of beefy flavour into it.
Once the beef has become quite cold, the mushrooms have reduced and become dry in texture and cooled, you can begin the next stage.
We're now going to wrap the piece of beef in pastry. But first of all, what I'm going to do is put 1/3 of the mushroom mixture down the centre of the pastry like this and spread it out. Then I'm going to take the beef and place the beef on top of the mushroom mixture in the centre. And then the rest of the mushroom is going to just be packed around the beef. It sort of almost completely encases it. And you need to do this with your hands. Now, the next thing you do is you just brush the edges of the piece of pastry with beaten egg. And then, as it's Christmas, we're going to wrap it up like a Christmas parcel, like a Christmas gift.
I make my own really quick flaky pastry, but if you're short of time, you can use ready-made all-butter puff pastry. Brush with a beaten egg if it's going straight into the oven, and for a festive feel, decorate with pastry leaves and berries. Pop into a preheated oven for around half an hour, depending on how rare you like it. Whilst it's cooking, you can make the red wine sauce. Using the same hot pan you seared the beef in, add the reserved mushroom soaking liquid, bring to the boil, let it bubble and reduce, then add a good slug of red wine and a heaped tablespoon of the mushroom mix. Season, then let it reduce slowly by about 1/3. The great thing about beurre en croûte is it can be served cold, with this really brilliant sauce. It's made with crème fraîche, whole grain mustard and hot horseradish. All you do is combine the ingredients and serve. And some people actually prefer it cold. But if you do prefer to serve it hot, maybe on Boxing Day or New Year's Eve, I'm now going to show you how to get ahead with the vegetables. These are roasted roots with herbs, which I always prepare 2 or 3 days in advance. I bag them up, leave them in the fridge, then they're ready to use when I need them. Here I've got carrots, turnips, swede, parsnip, red onions, red potatoes, crushed garlic, olive oil, thyme, rosemary, sage, and of course seasoning. When I'm ready to cook them, I just whack them into the oven for about 35 to 45 minutes. Now we're going to stay with vegetables, and for those who prefer not to eat meat, the following recipe has always been a real winner. Because I've got something really special for you, and it's made with fresh sage. This came originally from a vegetarian who wrote to me and requested, could I do a special recipe with no meat but with all the Christmas Day trimmings? It's a cheese and parsnip roulade, and you start with the traditional sage and onion stuffing, obviously without the pork, and spread it in a lined Swiss roll tin. Then make a classic white sauce and add 3 egg yolks. Then some grated strong cheddar cheese and a little more sage. Give it a mix and season well. Then whisk the egg whites to stiff peaks. Fold in 1 tablespoon to the roulade mixture, just to slacken it off. Then add this mixture to the rest of the whites and thoroughly fold them in. Pour it over the stuffing and spread out evenly. Next, make a parsnip puree. Blend softened parsnips with butter, cream, and a pinch of nutmeg and some seasoning. Lay out a sheet of baking parchment and sprinkle with chopped toasted hazelnuts. When the roulade is cooked, turn it out onto the hazelnuts and spread on the parsnip puree. Now, using the paper to help you, roll it up just like a Swiss roll. Finish with a sprinkle of vegetarian grated parmesan, and it's ready to serve with either bread sauce or cranberry relish. While we're on the subject of sage, it also has a great affinity with potatoes. This is called potatoes boulangères, and it's a great way of serving potatoes if you want to get ahead. In a buttered dish, add a layer of sliced potatoes, a layer of thinly sliced onions, and a sprinkling of chopped fresh sage. Add some seasoning, then repeat the whole process. Then add milk and stock together, and remember to put little flecks of butter on the top. Season again. They'll take an hour to cook, but if you want to prepare these well in advance, just cook them for 30 minutes, then another 30 minutes before serving. 10 minutes before the end, if you want them to look pretty, dip sage leaves in oil and lay them on top of the potatoes. They'll be nice and crisp when they come out of the oven. I'm very lucky that I married someone who loves Christmas just as much as I do. We both believe it's very much a family time, and what will always be an enduring memory for me is my own mother making sausage rolls. And now, neither Michael or I could possibly get through Christmas without them. Now I'm going to show you the quick flaky pastry I mentioned earlier. First of all, you freeze the butter until it's rock hard, then grate it into plain flour. It will give the pastry a sort of mouth-watering flakiness. Then flick the butter into the flour, add a pinch of salt and enough water to make it into a dough. My mother's secret was that she always added freshly chopped sage and onions to the sausage meat, which gives a real extra dimension. Roll it out gently until you have a long shape to match the length of the pastry. Then place it onto the pastry, brush one side with beaten egg and fold over, making sure the seam is underneath. Then cut out the sausage rolls. They can be any size, doesn't matter. Make 3 snips across the top of each one and then finish off with some beaten egg and pop them into the oven. If you want to get ahead, you can pack the cooled sausage rolls into boxes and freeze them. When they defrost, they'll be just as crisp as when you made them, so you can serve them at any time over the holiday. I happen to think sausage rolls are the ultimate canapé to serve with drinks, but if you want something different, here's a few ideas.
I'm going to show you something that I've only just discovered this year and I'm quite excited about it. It's a pastry called field brick. When you unpack it, it's got sheets of paper between the sheets of pastry, so you peel one off like this, and then underneath you find the pastry. And if you think phyllo, you're kind of nearly there, but it's better than phyllo, I think, because it's not quite so brittle. It's very silky to feel and quite good to handle, and when you eat it, it's much, much lighter.
These are quick and easy, but also impressive. Lay out the pastry, then top it with thinly sliced Parma ham, grated pecorino cheese, freshly chopped rosemary and black pepper. Bake in the oven just for 15 minutes and serve with your favourite Christmas tipple.
We have a need to party. It's part of being human, and so it's lovely to just once a year say goodbye to work, to everything else, and just have a real celebration.
Shop-bought canapés may be the most convenient, but these couldn't be easier. They're much cheaper and oh so much classier. These are called pistachio sablés. All you do is combine diced butter with flour, then add a pinch of cayenne pepper and seasoning. Then add shelled chopped pistachios and some freshly grated parmesan. Mix it all together, then transfer the dough onto a board. After that, lightly roll it to about 18 centimetres long. Wrap in cling film and chill in the freezer for 30 minutes. Then cut the chilled log into little discs and bake in the oven for up to 15 minutes. Here's another idea using the same dough, but this time you use Gruyere cheese and parmesan, but no nuts. Roll the dough into an oblong, cut it into strips, bake and serve with drinks. Christmas is food-wise the biggest feast in the calendar, and certainly not a time for self-denial. Good food and good wine is meant to be savoured and enjoyed and celebrated. So, some more celebration recipes coming up. A luxurious chocolate and sour cherry crumble, a Christmas cracker filled with Christmas pudding, and some very new ideas for the traditional trifle.
Well, I have to say that in our house, Christmas wouldn't ever be Christmas without a trifle. And this year, I've been making new recipes for trifles, and this is one of my favourites, although I like them all. But this one's made with this, which is called panettone, and it comes in pretty boxes like this at Christmas time, and it's Italian fruit bread. And the other ingredient, because normally in a trifle you would be using Madeira or sherry, this time we're using an Italian fortified wine called Marsala wine, which has a lovely, lovely deep flavour. What I'm going to do first of all is just show you, in case you haven't ever seen panettone, what it looks like. It's lovely and light and very, very fragrant. You start off in a trifle bowl with chunks of the fruit bread, and then you soak it in marsala for about 40 minutes. Now, during that 40 minutes, you need to just tip the bowl right over from side to side so that you make sure all the masala is soaked into the bread. It's going to have some extra fruit in it, although there's some in the panettone, we're putting extra. And what I've got here is chopped apricots and raisins. And what I did with those was brought them up to the boil in some marsala, and then they've been soaking as well to sort of plump up and get nice and juicy. We're now going to make a real proper homemade custard, the sort that's made with proper cream, and quite honestly, if you've made a homemade custard with all the right ingredients, you'll never want to buy one again. So we're starting off here in a saucepan with some double cream.
I'm also adding Marsala wine. Give them a quick whisk together and leave them to heat gently to simmering point.
And then the other ingredients in the custard are 5 egg yolks, some caster sugar, and then this is the magic ingredient, and that is corn flour. I'm going to combine these together. Now, the reason the corn flour's there, and I know chefs wouldn't approve of this, but I don't mind about chefs because we're home cooks, is that if you overheat the cream and you're just doing a straight custard with cream and egg yolks, it can curdle. But that little magic bit of corn flour in there is what's going to stop that happening. Or the good news is that even if it does curdle, if you've got that little bit of corn flour in, you can take it away and just whip it back to smooth again. The hot cream and masala goes onto the egg yolks. One good whisk. That's all going to be returned to the saucepan. Back onto the heat. And then we're just going to whisk it. You can see it's already bubbling and it'll thicken. Once the custard has got completely cold, you can then pour it over the panettone and the fruit. Then just give it a shake to distribute it evenly. And then on top of that, I've got some very lightly whipped cream here. Be careful when you whip the cream, it should be to the floppy stage, not too stiff, otherwise it's difficult to spread. And then finally, we've got toasted flaked almonds.
And there you have it, a very special panettone and zabaione trifle, Italian custard made with sweet Marsala wine. And here are some alternatives. This is the traditional old-fashioned trifle, flavoured with raspberries and a vanilla-flavoured custard. This one here is a drambuie trifle, a boozy alternative to serve on hogmanay. It's made with whisky liqueur custard and cream. But if chocolate is what you love, this is a chocolate lover's recipe. It's called chocolate and sour cherry crumble. It's made with a custard, just like we made before, with cocoa powder and one other key ingredient, dry soured cherries. Bring them up to simmering point in brandy, then leave for an hour or so to soak. Combine the cherries with the custard and pour into a bowl. Then whilst it's cooling, make a crumble. Into a processor, put self-raising flour, cocoa powder, demerara sugar and butter. Then give them a whiz until it becomes fine breadcrumbs. Add whole unblanched almonds. Pulse them until they are roughly chopped to a crunchy texture. Then transfer the crumble onto the cooled chocolate mixture. After it's been in the oven for about 35 minutes, let it rest, then sprinkle with cocoa powder and these glorious edible sugar sparkles. Then serve with some chilled pouring cream. I do hope I've been able to convince you that home cooking at Christmas really is worth the effort, and it's certainly a lot less stressful than tearing around the supermarkets. And I promise you, the proof of the pudding will definitely be in the eating. So when it comes to Christmas Day, the Christmas pudding is going to need another 2 hours steaming. Does it all happily, all by itself. But if I still haven't been able to convince you, then I'm going to show you an idea for an alternative. Finally, I've found a sublime way to use up Christmas pudding leftovers. These are called Christmas cracker puddings, using field-a-brick pastry that I showed you earlier. They're quick, easy, and absolutely everybody loves them. Take some Christmas pudding and just make it into a shape that will fill the Christmas cracker. I'm going to take the pastry, fold over a little piece like this to begin with, put that onto the pastry, and then I'm going to roll it up into my Christmas cracker. Make sure the join is underneath, like that, and then tie it up, tie up the ends. And I've got another piece of pastry here, and when you're using this, I've got this already here, you need to cover it with paper because it dries out quickly, like phyllo pastry. And what I'm going to do is just cut ribbons. Then you pinch the end of the cracker together like that. Take one of my ribbons, put it over the top, then bring both pieces underneath, and then just gently, very, very gently tie it. And you have to be gentle here, otherwise it breaks. It is fiddly. I admit it's fiddly, but just imagine making pastry, resting it, rolling it out and all of that. And now you see that it's done now. It was fiddly, but it's done. Plonk it onto a baking sheet and then whip it into the oven, and they'll take 18 minutes, that's all, to cook. So just let them cool slightly when they're cooked, and then it's nice to serve them cut in half. So then I'm going to put them onto a serving plate. We're going to serve it with something called mascarpone rum cream, and that's what it is. It's mascarpone with rum added. And it's also very, very good with ice cream. And then as it goes to the table, just a little flurry of icing sugar. Now all I'm going to need to make my Christmas a happy one is to know that maybe I've been able to help those of you who feel a bit unsure to have a go at cooking Christmas yourselves. I love listening to Dickens at Christmas when I'm cooking, and so I'm going to leave you with some of his words. Draw up your chair near the blazing fire, fill your glass and send round the song. So now there's only one thing to say, and that is, I hope you all have a really happy one.